In 1926, Picher, Oklahoma had over 14,000 residents and more money flowing through it than towns 10 times its size. The Tri-State Mining District, centered directly beneath Picher, was the largest producer of lead and zinc on the planet. More than half the lead and zinc consumed by the United States military during World War I came out of the ground under this town. The miners who pulled it out called themselves the guerrillas. They packed the high school football stands on Friday nights, drank at 24 saloons along Connell Street, and watched movies at the Roxy Theater on Saturday afternoons. Picher was loud, gritty, and very much alive. Today, it does not exist. The buildings are gone. The people are gone. The municipality itself has been legally dissolved by the state of Oklahoma. What remains are mountains of toxic gravel 200 feet tall, creeks running neon orange with acid mine drainage, and a network of unsupported caverns beneath the surface that could collapse without warning and swallow entire neighborhoods. The federal government evacuated every resident, bought out every home, and shut the lights off for good. Picher is now a restricted EPA Superfund site. It is considered one of the most toxic places in the Western Hemisphere, and almost no one outside of Oklahoma knows what happened here. If stories like this matter to you, give the video a like and hit subscribe. Zip Code Files covers the places America left behind. The story begins in late 1913 when a drilling rig owned by the Picher Lead Company got stuck during shipment near the tiny community of Cardin in Ottawa County, Oklahoma, a few miles south of the Kansas border. The crew drilled where they stopped, more out of convenience than strategy, and struck an extraordinary deposit of lead and zinc ore on the Quapaw allotment of a man named Harry Crawfish. Within 2 years, 20 more strikes followed across the surrounding prairie. Word traveled fast. Prospectors, roughnecks, and speculators poured into Ottawa County from Missouri, Kansas, and as far away as the Appalachian coalfields, looking for work underground. By March 1918, the town that erupted around those strikes was officially incorporated and named for Oliver S. Picher, who had built the Picher Lead Company out of Joplin, Missouri, starting in 1875. In 1906, Picher's firm merged with Cincinnati's Eagle White Lead Works to form Eagle Picher Lead Company, which would become the dominant mining operator in the region for the next half-century. Oliver Picher served as the merged company's first president. He chose Chicago as the neutral headquarters. He died in 1920, but the company that bore his name kept digging. The timing could not have been better for the war effort. Europe was tearing itself apart, and the United States needed lead for bullets and zinc for shell casings in quantities no existing supply chain could handle. Picher delivered. The Oklahoma Historical Society estimates that the Picher field produced more than $20 billion in ore in nominal terms between 1917 and 1947. By 1920, the census recorded nearly 10,000 residents. By 1926, the population peaked at 14,252, with another 4,000 commuters arriving daily by interurban trolley from Joplin, Carthage, and other tri-state towns to work the mines. Ottawa County became the single largest source of lead and zinc in the world. During World War II, the mines ramped up again. The metal that went into American ammunition, from North Africa to Normandy to the Pacific, came from the ground beneath Picher. The mining method was called room and pillar. Crews excavated ore at depths of 200 to 300 feet, leaving columns of rock in place to support the ceiling of the tunnels above them. At peak operation, 248 mills ran simultaneously on the surface, each one sitting on a 40-acre Quapaw allotment lease. Pumps removed roughly 23 million gallons of groundwater per day just to keep the tunnels dry enough to work in. A 2022 academic study compiled more than 400 historical underground maps and estimated the total volume of mine workings at roughly 80,000 acre-feet spread beneath 3,560 acres. The authors warned that this was a minimum because many maps had been lost. The earth under Picher was not just mined, it was hollowed out. Above ground, the town built itself around the men who went below. Connell Street had bowling alleys, pool halls, and a diner called G&J's Gorilla's Cage, named for the high school mascot. There were at least 5 movie theaters at peak, including the Mystic, the Plaza, and the Roxy, which opened in 1932 with about 500 seats. The Picher Cardin Gorillas played football under lights, and in 1984, 1 year after the EPA declared the town a Superfund site, the football team won the Oklahoma Class 1A state championship. The community was tight in the way that mining towns tend to be, bonded by shared risk and shared dirt. But that dirt was poison, and nobody told them. The mining process generated a byproduct called chat, a crushed gravel laced with lead, zinc, cadmium, and arsenic. For every ton of ore the mills extracted, they produced 7 to 10 tons of waste. Over the life of the Picher field, the mines generated more than 70 million tons of chat tailings and another 36 million tons of mill sand and sludge. The waste was piled into mountains, some of them 200 feet tall and visible from miles in every direction. More than 1,400 mine shafts dotted the landscape, and at least 450 of them remained open and unfenced. Because the dangers of lead exposure were not widely understood at the time, and because the mining companies never warned anyone, the town treated chat like regular gravel. They used it to pave roads. They spread it in driveways and parking lots. They lined the high school running track with it. Parents filled sandboxes with it. Children rode all-terrain vehicles up and down the Chat Mountains and came home covered in toxic dust that their families mistook for ordinary dirt. When the wars ended, so did the demand. The population that had peaked at over 14,000 in 1926 dropped to 5,848 by 1940 and 2,553 by 1960. Young families left for Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and the new defense plants springing up across the Sun Belt. By the late 1950s, the easily accessible ore was gone. Eagle Picher Industries shifted its operations toward manufacturing, eventually producing asbestos insulation products for the U.S. military, a decision that would generate over 70,000 personal injury claims and push the company into Chapter 11 bankruptcy in January 1991, with liabilities of $2.5 billion. The reorganization plan paid asbestos and lead poisoning victims roughly 37 cents on every dollar they were owed. A second bankruptcy followed in April 2005. The company that had built Picher never paid for what it left behind. By October 2023, the operating successor, Eagle Picher Technologies, had been acquired by Toothill Corporation. It now makes defense and aerospace batteries from facilities in Joplin and Pittsburgh, Kansas. The name survives. The town does not. The last mines in Picher closed in 1967. The pumps that had kept the tunnels dry were shut off. 23 million gallons of groundwater per day began refilling the abandoned shafts, reacting with the leftover metals to create acid mine drainage. Within a decade, the water turned toxic. Tar Creek, the local waterway that had once been clear enough to swim in, turned neon orange. In the early 1980s, Oklahoma Water Resources Board hydrologist John Mott measured the pH of Tar Creek discharge as low as 1.7, roughly the acidity of stomach acid. The iron-rich water created a chemical precipitate called Yellow Boy, an orange sludge of iron oxyhydroxide that coated the creek bed and killed everything in it. Fish disappeared entirely. The water stained anything it touched. Former residents recall shoes turning permanently red after wading in the creek. Tar Creek still runs orange today, and roughly 1 million gallons of contaminated mine water discharge into it every single day. In 1983, the EPA placed Picher and the surrounding area on the National Priorities List as the Tar Creek Superfund site, one of the first such designations in the country. It was September 8, 1983. But the initial response was agonizingly slow and badly targeted. The EPA focused on diverting contaminated water and plugging mine shafts, rather than addressing the chat piles sitting in people's yards or testing the children who played on them. The agency spent years studying the water, issuing reports and debating remediation strategies, while the wind kept blowing lead dust off the Chat Mountains and into the homes of Picher's remaining families. For over a decade, nobody in a position of authority ordered blood tests on the children. Nobody measured the lead concentrations in the soil where kids played every afternoon. Nobody told parents that the gray dust their children tracked into the house was a neurotoxin. The true scope of the damage became undeniable in 1994 when the Indian Health Service conducted blood screenings of children in the Tar Creek area. 34% of the children tested had blood lead levels exceeding 10 micrograms per deciliter, the CDC's threshold of concern at the time. A follow-up study of Picher-Cardin school children found that over 43% had elevated levels. That was 11 times the Oklahoma state average. Lead poisoning at those concentrations causes irreversible neurological damage. It impairs cognitive development, disrupts behavior, and lowers IQ permanently. There is no cure. There is no reversal. The damage done to a child's brain by lead exposure at age 4 is still there at age 40. An entire generation of Picher's children had been poisoned by the ground they played on, the dust that blew through their windows, and the water that ran through their yards. The EPA had known about the site contamination for 11 years before anyone thought to test the kids. The state of Oklahoma had done nothing. Eagle Picher Industries was already in bankruptcy court arguing about asbestos, not lead. Nobody was coming to help. But the lead in their blood was not the only threat. The ground beneath their feet was about to give way. Late in the mining era, operators engaged in a practice called pillar robbing, going back into exhausted tunnels and extracting the support columns themselves as ore supplies dwindled. They did this without keeping records of which pillars they removed and which ones they left standing. In January 2006, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers released the Subsidence Evaluation Report for the Picher mining field. The study, commissioned by Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma, found that 86% of the buildings in Picher were undermined, and that 286 specific locations were at risk of imminent ground collapse. Sinkholes could open without warning, swallowing homes, streets, and anyone standing on them. The mine workings beneath the town held roughly 76,800 acre-feet of contaminated water. The ground was not just poisoned, it was hollow. The federal government responded with a mandatory buyout through the lead-impacted community's Relocation Assistance Trust, known as LICRAT. Before LICRAT, the state of Oklahoma had already run a smaller buyout in 2005 and 2006 under Governor Brad Henry, spending $3 million to relocate 52 families with children aged 6 and under, the age group most vulnerable to lead's effects on the developing brain. But the subsidence report changed the calculus entirely. This was no longer about lead exposure alone. The ground itself was failing. LICRAT extended 878 buyout offers to Picher homeowners. 96% accepted. The average payout was $65,624 per home. A total of 628 residences, 74 businesses, and 125 renters were relocated. The final cost came to roughly $45 million. Well under the projected $60 million, though a class action lawsuit by 161 plaintiffs alleged that the appraisal firm Cinnabar Service Company of Tulsa had deliberately undervalued their properties. That case settled for $1.3 million, about $4,000 per household. The math was brutal. People who had paid off their mortgages over 30 years received checks that would barely cover a down payment somewhere else. Elderly residents who had never lived anywhere else were told to pick a new town. Families who had buried their parents in the Picher cemetery were told the cemetery would remain, but nothing around it would. For families whose roots in Picher went back 3 generations, the checks felt less like compensation and more like clearance prices on a life. Then, on the evening of May 10, 2008, while the buyout was still underway, nature delivered the final blow. At 5:39 in the evening, an EF4 tornado entered Picher from the northwest, cutting a path up to a mile wide through the southeast portion of town. Wind speeds reached between 166 and 200 miles per hour. The tornado destroyed more than 150 homes and injured 150 people. 6 residents of Picher were killed. Samuel Donberry was 20 years old. His wife, Tracy Donberry, was 19. They had been married less than a year. Darrell Edward Patterson, 28, was visiting Picher for the first time that day. He had come to help the Berries move. Chizuri Cox was 80. Misty Dawn Kelly was 30. She died shielding her 4-year-old son Brandon with her body. Brandon was ripped from his father's arms and carried nearly 2 blocks through the air. He survived. Linda Christine Mathis was 48. She worked at the Buffalo Run Casino and had gone to her mother's house to keep her company during the storm. Her daughter Angela found her body while canvassing the neighborhood for survivors. The tornado continued east into Missouri and killed 15 more people. Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff toured the wreckage and said it looked like a small nuclear bomb had gone off. Federal and state officials confirmed immediately that there would be no funding to rebuild. The buyout would simply continue. For the residents who had been holding out, the tornado destroyed whatever was left to save. The Picher-Cardin School Board voted 55-6 to dissolve in April 2009. It was one of the most lopsided votes in the history of Oklahoma education, and it ended a school district that had been operating continuously since 1918. The final graduating class walked in May. 11 seniors received their diplomas in the gymnasium of a building that would be demolished within a year. Remaining students transferred to the Quapaw and Commerce school districts, where some of them carried the Gorillas mascot on their backpacks into schools that had no idea what it meant. On September 1, 2009, the state of Oklahoma officially dissolved the city of Picher. The post office closed the same day. The zip code 74360 was deactivated. The 2010 census counted 20 people within the former city limits. The municipality was formally dissolved on November 26, 2013. The concrete gorilla statue that had stood in front of the high school, a 3,000-pound mascot called Bobo, was sold at auction for $2,500, then bought back by a Picher graduate named Jody Morgan as a Father's Day gift for her father. It is now part of the official Picher-Cardin Memorial. Former students and residents return every December for the Picher Christmas Parade, organized by a group that calls itself the Chat Rats, a reunion in a town where there is nothing left to visit except each other. One man stayed behind. Gary Linderman, a pharmacist who had first come to Picher in 1975 as a student extern, opened his own shop there in 1998. He called it Ole Miner's Pharmacy, and he ran it from a building on Highway 69 long after every other business in town had shuttered. People magazine profiled him as a hero among us in 2007 after he turned down a federal buyout offer for $95,000. He kept filling prescriptions, taking IOUs from former residents who had moved to neighboring towns, and making personal deliveries to their new addresses. He had a 558-pound Minnesota black bear mounted on the pharmacy wall, a state record from 1998. The media called him Lights Out Linderman, the last man standing. On June 6, 2015, Gary Linderman died at his ranch in Welch, Oklahoma, at the age of 60. His pharmacy closed the following Tuesday. The lights in Picher went out for good. But this story has one more chapter, and it belongs to the people who were here before the miners, before the town, before the name Picher meant anything at all. The land beneath Picher was Quapaw land. The Ogapaw people had been relocated to this corner of northeastern Oklahoma from their ancestral territory along the Mississippi and Arkansas rivers. It had been their reservation since 1834, long before Oklahoma was a state, long before anyone thought to look for metal in the ground. When the federal government opened native allotments to mineral leasing in the early 20th century, the mining leases that built Picher were negotiated on Quapaw allotments. Many of them signed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs on behalf of allottees the government had declared legally incompetent to manage their own affairs. The royalties flowed to a fraction of the people whose land was being destroyed. The Quapaw did not choose to have their soil ripped open, their water poisoned, and their children exposed to lead. Those decisions were made for them by federal agencies and corporate executives who took the profit and left the mess. When the mines closed and the companies left, the contamination stayed on Quapaw soil. For decades, the tribe watched as the EPA studied, debated, and underfunded the cleanup. Then, in October 2013, the Quapaw Nation did something no tribe in American history had ever done. They took over direct remediation of a Superfund property. The first parcel was a 40-acre tract called the Catholic 40, which held the ruins of an 1893 Catholic church and St. Mary's of the Quapaw boarding school, a place where Quapaw children had been sent to be assimilated, then abandoned, and eventually buried under 107,000 tons of mining waste. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The Quapaw Nation Environmental Office, with scientists including Summer King, began removing the waste, cleaning the soil, and restoring the land 1 acre at a time. They have since completed additional projects at Beaver Creek North, the smelter site, Bird Dog, and the Howe Interim Measures site, where a 70-foot chat pile was removed and converted into wetland. By April 2024, the Quapaw Nation had overseen the removal of more than 7 million tons of mine waste and remediated more than 600 acres. By late 2024, the figure had risen to approximately 8 million tons. That is more progress in 11 years of tribal-led work than the EPA achieved in the preceding 3 decades. The cleaned parcels are now growing corn, winter wheat, and soybeans. Cattle graze on restored pastures. A bison herd has been introduced. Metal uptake studies have confirmed that the crops are safe for consumption. The Quapaw Nation has proposed a 1,100-acre solar project on the former Bird Dog Chat Pile site. The land will never be residential, it will never be commercial. But it is becoming usable again. And the people doing the work are the same people whose land was taken and poisoned in the first place. Roughly 30 million tons of chat remain on the landscape, down from an estimated 178 million tons at the peak of mining. Tar Creek still runs orange. 1 million gallons of contaminated mine water still discharge into it every day, and downstream contamination of Grand Lake of the Cherokees, a major drinking water reservoir for northeastern Oklahoma, remains an active concern. The EPA has spent more than $300 million at the Tar Creek site since 1983, and the cleanup is expected to take decades more at current funding levels. In 2021, American Rivers named Tar Creek one of the 10 most endangered rivers in America. It was listed again in 2022. Rebecca Jim, a Cherokee Nation citizen and co-founder of the advocacy group Lead Agency, has been fighting for Tar Creek since the 1990s. She serves as the official Tar Creek keeper. She has testified before Congress, filed complaints with every relevant federal agency, and outlasted 3 EPA administrators. Her assessment of 4 decades of federal intervention is direct. The EPA did something, but it was not enough, and much of what they did not work. Picher, Oklahoma, manufactured the bullets that helped win 2 world wars. The men who dug the ore out of the ground did not know it was killing them. Mickey Mantle's father, Elvin Mutt Mantle, worked the Eagle Picher mines 5 miles south in Commerce, Oklahoma. He went underground every day in the same shafts, breathing the same lead and zinc dust as the men in Picher. On May 7, 1952, when Mickey was 20 years old and already wearing the pinstripes of the New York Yankees, Mutt Mantle died of Hodgkin's disease. He was 40. Mickey's grandfather, Charlie Mantle, also a tri-state miner, had died of the same cancer before he turned 50. Hodgkin's disease is now linked to prolonged inhalation of lead and zinc dust. Mickey Mantle grew up believing the men in his family were cursed, that they did not make it past 40. He was not cursed. He was poisoned. His father was poisoned. And so was every other miner who spent decades in those tunnels without a word of warning from the company that employed them. The mines took the ore. The companies took the profit. Eagle Picher Industries filed bankruptcy twice and walked away. The government took 4 decades to act, and the town took the fall for all of it. Picher is not a ruin. It is a receipt. It is a detailed, itemized record of what happens when an industry extracts everything it can from a place, from the earth and from the people, and walks away and leaves the mess for whoever is left. The zip code is 74360. It belongs to no one now. If you think more people should know what happened here, share this video and give it a like. And if you want to see the next place America forgot, subscribe to Zip Code Files. We will see you in the next one.